The Gospels are filled with disabled bodies. It's one of the ways our Gospel accounts differ from almost any other book or media we consume. The Gospels insist that sick and disabled bodies be seen and taken seriously. Last week, we encountered the man with a scale disease called leprosy. This week, we hear the story of the servant who has been paralyzed. This story confronts us not only with the existential limitations of life inside a human body, but with the societal barriers we place as humans to the full flourishing of all human life. Jesus has entered the border town of Capernaum when a Roman army commander approaches him. This centurion is a Gentile, not a member of Jesus's community of followers or of Jesus's wider community. And this commander comes making a plea on behalf of someone who is also not only a Gentile, but also a slave, a nobody in the Mediterranean world. He says to Jesus, "Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed in terrible distress." What happens in this border town now will show us a lot of different borders. The line between Jew and Gentile, the line between slave and free, the line between able-bodied and paralyzed. Jesus crosses all those lines with a single sentence. I will come and cure him. I will come, Jesus says, from where he is to where the centurion lives, from the community of the Jews to the home of a Gentile, at the request of a commander to the bedside of a slave. I will come and cure him from distressed paralysis to full-bodied healing. I will come, Jesus says. But the centurion stops him. Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. But only say the word, and my servant will be healed. This centurion somehow sees and understands that the power of God in Jesus is a power that has no limits, a power that can stretch across physical distance as well as across social distance, a power that can cross the boundaries that separate people of different ethnic and religious and cultural origins, a power that can, with a word, disempower the realities of those boundaries and create healing. When this Roman officer articulates this vision of Jesus's power, Jesus is amazed, and he says something amazing in response. Jesus tells his followers, "Truly I tell you, in no one in Israel have I found such faith." This is the first time in Matthew's gospel that the word faith is used. And Jesus uses it for someone who is not one of his followers or even a member of his community. He uses it of a Gentile, a Roman army commander. His words show us that he, Jesus, is not the only one confronting and crossing boundaries and lines in this story. The centurion, too, took the initiative to approach, to reach out to Jesus for something beyond the limits. Something beyond the limits of his own human power. This border crossing was his act of faith. And notice that what Jesus calls faith here is not mere belief or assent. In this case, it's not even following. What Jesus praises here as faith is a reaching, an effort, an act of will to seek the sacred, to ask for help. The centurion's movement to seek healing is answered by Jesus' movement to give healing. He tells the centurion, "Go, let it be done for you according to your faith." And the servant is healed. Jesus praises the faith of this outsider, and he heals the outsider's outsider slave with a word from a distance. And that all seems like quite enough for one encounter. But Jesus never stops at enough. Jesus always takes things further. He turns to his followers and he pronounces a vision of the future, a healing vision of the obliteration of cultural boundaries, social boundaries, geographic boundaries, of all our human-made boundaries transcended. He gives a glimpse of the heavenly banquet at which outsiders will find themselves inside around the table and presumed insiders will find themselves tossed out. People will come from east and west, Jesus says, to eat with Abraham and Isaac in the kingdom of heaven. East and west, this goes beyond the simple divisions of Jew and Gentile, slave and free. This is globe spanning. This is reality transcending. This is all. And his words link the healing of the centurion's slave, the ultimate outsider, to that heavenly feast. This healing is a foretaste of the joy and community and abundance of God's kingdom, of abundance made available for all. The most fundamental boundary on human existence is our physical limitation in the form of pain, disability, disease, death. That's the hard limit of human existence in a body. Our limitation as physical beings is the one type of boundary we all ultimately come up against. Whatever freedoms we experience in life due to race, class, gender, or other status, none of that can ultimately save us from the limitation of life in a human body. But pain, disability, disease, death, they are more than merely physical limits. They create emotional, social, existential barriers as well. They create questions of meaning. They can cause us to become cut off from each other, from ourselves, from the abundance and joy of life. If you've ever dealt with chronic pain and the way it persistently yanks your focus inward, then you know what I'm talking about. If you've navigated life with a disability, seen or unseen, that has blocked you from access to the fullness of life, then you know. If you've grieved the unfathomable death of someone you loved and whose existence seemed crucial to your own, or if you've pondered your own mortality and found yourself shrinking from the reality of this hard limit on your own life, then you know. you know, our physical limitation as mortals is more than a physical boundary. It is emotional, it is social, it is existential. And so we see in the story, the paralyzed servant was not just paralyzed, he was in terrible distress. The limitations of our bodies radiate out into other forms of restriction and pain and barriers. Part of it is emotional. We have an emotional response to the physical, but there's more. There's the social, the communal, the systemic, the societal. What starts as the limit of a human body never remains only within the body. Ultimately, doesn't every barrier between us and each other, between all of us and the fullness of God's wholeness and peace, doesn't every barrier start here in the body? Doesn't it all spring from how we humans decide to assess and deal with each other's bodies and our own? Doesn't it all spring from the meaning we decide to make and ascribe? The body has a color, and we create the category of race. The body can perform certain kinds of work, and we create assessments of value, and then we trade based on that, and then we create economies, and then we develop class and status. The body has a perceived gender and is afforded or denied certain rights and privileges based on that. One body can dominate another body and can collude with other bodies to dominate entire classes or communities or cultures or countries full of bodies. And then a body is born in one place, in one set of circumstances, with a color and an assigned gender and a set of physical abilities and limitations. This body comes into the world with an entire set of barriers or privileges that are social, communal, systemic, societal, that have nothing to do with that particular individual in that particular body. But those barriers or privileges have already been built. They have been put in place throughout the course of time. And what is one body supposed to do about all of that? One body can't do very much to change any of it. It can be paralyzing to think about. It's distressing. We see the inequities between the experiences different children are having with school during the pandemic and different communities of children. And it's paralyzing. We see the inequities, but it's paralyzing. We hear how teachers are being devalued and maligned after months of being called heroes, and it's distressing, terribly distressing. We know that women of all classes, races, and statuses are bearing the burden of caring for children and elders and home, while either maintaining their jobs or losing them or falling behind in them or dropping out of them. We know that people of color and communities of color are suffering the ravages of the coronavirus more than white people and white communities. We know that vaccine access, like matters of access always do, plays out along lines of privilege and connection and location. And if we're honest, we also recognize that while our eyes are on our education systems and healthcare systems and political processes, our eyes are averted from those who have always been the least visible: the incarcerated, those without housing, the disabled, the mentally ill. When we try to take in all these realities and other realities of race and class and gender and disability and inequity, we find ourselves paralyzed and in distress. What can we do? Everything is so big and difficult and drenched in history and entrenched. It feels like we can do nothing or very little. And it's true. One body alone can only do so much. But together is where we have to start. The centurion did not try to fix his servant's paralysis and distress, or he may have tried a little but soon realized he was at the limits of his own ability. So he struck out. He went beyond himself. He crossed the boundaries of culture and religion and geography to reach out to Jesus, to ask for something, not for himself, but for someone else. This is what faith is. Not mere belief, not mere feeling. Faith is asking. Faith is seeking. Faith is reaching. Faith is acting. Faith starts by realizing the gap between where we are and what we need. Faith starts by realizing that alone, I'm not enough. And healing starts with a word. The centurion somehow knows that Jesus merely needs to speak the truth of healing to accomplish it. And that's what happens. The healing of communities, the healing that crosses our human-built boundaries of race, class, gender, and more. Here is where this kind of healing can start, with our words. Healing starts when we can name what is true. Healing starts when we are willing to see the distress of others and name it without minimizing it. Healing starts when we can say what separates us from each other. Healing starts when we reach for it, and when we reach for it not just for ourselves, but for others. Healing starts when we can see and understand that God's family transcends our boundaries. God's ingathering love pulls from east and west, gathering the disabled and the outcast, the displaced and the dispossessed, the distressed and the grieving, and anyone who can see that all are meant to be there at God's table, the inclusive feast of God's healing love. All human bodies and all human communities are meant to participate in the goodness and grace of God's reality, not just someday in God's kingdom to come, but right now on earth as it is in heaven. Whatever obstacles and divisions that restrict people from participating in the fullness and goodness of God-given life, the shalom God means for us all, those boundaries must be taken seriously and dealt with. They must be named truthfully and claimed painfully. And then they must be crossed and transcended and healed. Not by you or me, but by you and me. All of us seeking healing together, seeking healing from Jesus for all of us, sharing the healing we know with each other, with the world. Go, Jesus said to the centurion. Let it be done for you according to your faith. And the servant was healed within the hour. And can you imagine the scene back at the centurion's house when the servant started wiggling his toes? Did his wife drop the pitcher of water she was carrying to his bedside when she saw him bolt upright in bed? Did his daughter fling her arms around his neck as he stood and scooped her up? Did the neighbors come running to see what all the whooping and laughing and crying was about? And what do you suppose they all did next? Well, what do you imagine all of us will do once the pandemic is finally over? A meal, a feast, a celebration around a table with other people. Can't you see it? Can't you see it? See the servants, neighbors hauling out tables and chairs, pushing them together, setting the tables for a feast. See them sending their sons out down the road to spread the news. Come celebrate, come and see. Our neighbor was paralyzed in terrible distress, and now he's been healed. See the people come from east and west to sit down together and eat. All those different bodies from all those different statuses, from all those different communities. See them come and share a meal. And see the servant sitting there, laughing and telling his astonishing story as he passes a dish of food with hands that just an hour ago did not work. And see, here comes the centurion rushing home breathless with his own story to tell, finding a feast in the front yard. Watch as the servant stands up, ready to wait on him, but finds himself instead swallowed up by the centurion's embrace. And look, here comes Jesus after all, just like he said, I will come. I will come, he told the centurion, but the centurion didn't feel worthy to receive him. So Jesus cured the slave from afar, but still, Jesus had said it, I will come. And there he is, whether we're worthy or not. See them all celebrate. And there's your chair, and there's mine too. And look at all that food. Hear all that laughter and feel all that love at the table we'll get to share. There's so much. There's more than enough. There will always be more than enough And no matter how many bodies are there, that table is always bigger than we could have imagined. Because that's what the kingdom of God is like. That's what the Feast of Love is all about. It's big, and it is plenty, and it is good, and it is healing, and it is for all.